General Motors is the latest car maker to feel the pain of President Trump's tariffs. The
Today, General Motors said tariffs are hurting its bottom line.
company says it lost $1.1 billion from its bottom line this past quarter. And this comes as the latest CBS News polls show 60% of Americans oppose new U.S. tariffs, and 61% think the Trump administration is focusing on them too much.
Factories falling silent, workers sent home, Wall Street in panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. When Donald Trump slammed tariffs on imported cars and parts, the White House promised it would bring jobs back to America.
Things going to be based on bringing our jobs back, the good jobs, the real jobs.
But instead, it detonated a bomb right in the heart of the auto industry. General Motors, America's most iconic car maker, just admitted it could lose up to $5 billion this year alone because of these tariffs. Assembly lines from Detroit to Ontario are being idled, suppliers are collapsing, and workers are whispering about whether their paychecks will disappear next. So how did a policy designed to rescue American factories end up crippling them instead? And why are the ripple effects spreading far beyond GM, threatening the entire global auto market? Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get into it. On May 29th, 2025, General Motors dropped a letter that hit harder than a recall notice. It wasn't a flashy press release, not even a major speech, just a routine shareholder letter. But inside was a bombshell. GM revealed that President Trump's sweeping tariffs on imported cars and parts would gut up to $5 billion from its earnings this year. This wasn't a line buried in financial jargon. It was a siren. Wall Street traders immediately slashed GM's outlook, and the company's stock price stumbled. Analysts started running the numbers, and the picture was terrifying. $5 billion wasn't just a dent. It was nearly a third of GM's annual profits gone in a single policy stroke. Inside the factories, the shock was even more real. Within weeks, GM began cutting work shifts, furloughing teams, and shutting down assembly lines from Michigan to Ontario. On the floor, workers whispered about what might come next. How long could these lines stay silent before temporary shutdowns turned permanent? Economists warned tens of thousands of jobs were suddenly on the line. What began as a letter to shareholders was already spiraling into a crisis that stretched far beyond Detroit. But this wasn't just about GM's profits. This was about how an entire industry could unravel. And what came next proved just how quickly tariffs meant to protect America could start tearing it apart. When the White House announced a 25% tariff on imported cars and parts, it was sold as a masterstroke, a way to force companies like GM to build more in America and bring back lost jobs. But reality hit like a wrecking ball. GM's global supply chain couldn't just be remade overnight. Nearly 40% of the company's parts come from abroad. That meant almost every car, truck, and SUV rolling off the line was suddenly thousands of dollars more expensive to build. In fact, GM estimated each pickup truck now costs $200 more just because of tariffs. At first, the company tried to absorb the blow, swallowing those costs to keep showroom prices steady. But there's only so long you can hold your breath before you drown. By mid-year, GM had no choice but to raise vehicle prices, pushing the burden directly onto customers. The government did offer a token concession: no double taxing overlapping parts and a tiny credit for final assembly in the U.S. But the relief amounted to just 3%, a band-aid on a gaping wound. And while Washington spun the tariffs as patriotic, inside GM, executives saw something else. Billions in cash that should have gone to new batteries, electric vehicles, and next-generation cars, now vanishing into thin air. This wasn't just a financial problem. It was the trigger that set off a chain reaction, one that would spread far beyond GM's boardroom. And the first to feel the blast? Workers on the factory floor and the towns that depended on them. By April, the ripple effects were everywhere. GM's Factory Zero in Detroit, once celebrated as the symbol of America's electric future, suddenly went dark. Production ground to a halt, and nearly 200 workers were sent home. The official excuse was soft demand for EVs, but on the floor, whispers told a different story. The soaring cost of imported parts was strangling the assembly line. The shock didn't stop at Detroit. North of the border, GM's Cami plant in Ontario, home to Bright Drop electric vans, was idled, leaving 1,200 employees in limbo until at least October. Soon after, GM's Oshawa plant slashed its overnight shift, effectively laying off 700 more workers. For a factory that had only recently been revived from closure, It felt like déjà vu, history repeating itself. And when GM sneezes, its suppliers catch pneumonia. Dient, a major parts maker in Tennessee, shut down 2 of its plants, instantly erasing 400 jobs. Managers called it elastic idling, a temporary pause meant to snap back. But for workers, temporary still means no paycheck, bills piling up, and anxiety eating away at every sleepless night. Local communities were gutted. In Michigan, the owner of a diner near one of the idled plants said nearly half his regular customers disappeared overnight. In Indiana, a supplier's manager admitted he might be forced to cut his workforce in half if orders didn't return. Economists began warning that the turmoil could threaten as many as 50,000 auto jobs across North America. Suddenly, the tariffs weren't some abstract political debate in Washington. They were shuttered diners, silent parking lots, and empty paychecks. But just as these layoffs spread like wildfire, another crisis was looming inside GM. A crisis in the one area that was supposed to secure its future. Because while factories fell silent, GM's electric dream was about to collide with brutal reality. For years, GM bragged it was leading the charge into America's electric future. Shiny EV trucks, new battery plants, bold claims that it would outpace Tesla. But by mid-2025, that dream was unraveling. First came the policy shock. Washington quietly repealed the $7,500 federal tax credit that made EVs even remotely affordable. Overnight, GM lost one of its biggest selling points. Then Congress froze funding for nationwide charging stations, the backbone of any serious EV rollout. Without new chargers, owning an EV suddenly looked a lot less practical. And then came the killer blow, tariffs on battery minerals. Lithium, cobalt, rare earth metals, all hit with new restrictions. GM's Ultium batteries, the crown jewel of its electric strategy, instantly became more expensive to build. The fallout was brutal. GM's Factory Zero in Detroit, once buzzing with promise, was now crammed with unsold electric Hummers and Silverados. Wrapped in protective plastic, they sat waiting for buyers who never showed. GM's own surveys revealed the grim truth. Only 4% of potential customers were still considering an EV, down from 14% the year before. Deals like 0% financing weren't enough to lure people in. Insurance premiums were high, electricity rates were climbing, and the supposed cost savings of driving on power had evaporated. Many buyers simply stuck with gasoline trucks, or delayed buying altogether. CFO Paul Jacobson admitted the math was dire. GM would need to sell 100,000 Ultium trucks every year just to break even, but projections showed sales barely hitting 65,000. Each unsold EV sitting in a warehouse tied up about $45,000 in capital, while the battery inside slowly degraded, losing value every day. The company began quietly slowing EV production, delaying rollouts and cutting back schedules. The dream of dominating the EV market was slipping away, not because customers didn't want the future, but because tariffs, policy reversals, and skyrocketing costs strangled it before it had a chance. And inside GM's factories, that failure wasn't just financial. It was creating a new kind of divide, one that pitted workers against each other. Because now, the battle lines weren't Ford versus Chevy. They were worker versus worker, union versus union, country versus country. On the factory floor, the conversation used to be simple. Ford guys argued with Chevy guys. Truck people teased the sedan crew. But after Trump's tariffs, the debates turned darker. Who's really winning and who's being sacrificed? Union leaders were caught in the middle. In the U.S., UAW President Shawn Fain applauded the tariffs, calling them a long overdue move to put American jobs first. But north of the border, Unifor President Lana Payne blasted GM, accusing the company of gutting Canadian jobs just to score political points in Washington. Even rank-and-file workers were split. Some cheered the tariffs at first, convinced they would lock in their plant's future. But when their own shifts were cut, optimism turned to anger. Suddenly, workers who once waved flags for America first were asking if maybe the tariffs had gone too far. The divide cut deep. If unions in the U.S. supported tariffs, they risked looking like traitors to Canadian and Mexican workers. If they opposed tariffs, they risked being accused of abandoning American jobs. It was a no-win situation. And while leaders wrestled with politics, the rank and file struggled with survival. Inside union halls, the atmosphere was tense. Veterans of the 2019 Lordstown closures still remembered how a temporary idle turned permanent, leaving thousands jobless. Many workers quietly kept their toolboxes packed, ready to move if their plant didn't reopen. Supplemental pay, about 75% of wages during an idle, softened the blow at first, but as weeks dragged into months, bills piled up. Mortgage payments don't wait for politics. And here's the cruelest twist. Divided unions are weaker unions. When workers argue among themselves, it becomes easier for management to slash costs, push layoffs, and freeze wages. The very people tariffs were supposed to protect were now more vulnerable than ever. Meanwhile, Washington showed no sympathy, because when GM pleaded for relief, Donald Trump's response was as blunt as it was brutal. You made your bed, now lie in it. When GM's troubles hit the headlines, many expected Washington to blink. After all, tens of thousands of jobs, billions in profits, and entire communities were at risk. Surely the White House would offer some relief. Not this time. President Trump brushed off GM's warnings with a cold shrug. His message was blunt. You made your bed, now lie in it. To him, the crisis wasn't a tariff problem. It was GM's problem. If the company couldn't handle the new rules, that was proof it had grown weak, too dependent on foreign parts, too slow to adapt. No bailouts, no carve-outs, no sympathy. For the unions, this was a brutal wake-up call. The patriotic slogans they had leaned on, Buy American, Protect Our Jobs, now rang hollow. Trump wasn't budging. Instead of being a shield, the tariffs had become a sword, cutting into workers on both sides of the border. And this wasn't just about GM anymore. Trump's trade war was reshaping the entire auto industry. Other automakers were scrambling, plants were idling, and suppliers were gasping for air. The crisis was spreading, from minivans to semis, from Detroit to Seoul. What had started as a single shareholder letter was morphing into a global storm. And the next wave would show just how deeply the shockwaves of America's tariffs were rattling the world's automakers. General Motors may have been the first to sound the alarm, but it wasn't alone for long. Across North America, automakers were caught in the same storm. Take Stellantis, the parent of Chrysler. Its Windsor plant in Ontario, the last North American factory still building minivans, turned into a roller coaster of shutdowns and slowdowns. Each pause rippled south across the border, forcing Michigan and Indiana suppliers to lay off nearly 900 workers. Dealers soon found their lots jammed with unsold Pacificas, gathering dust while prices kept inching higher. Then came Volvo. Its truck plants in Pennsylvania and Virginia warned of furloughing 1,000 workers. Why? Because the price of a new semi jumped from $165,000 to $180,000 thanks to tariffs. Fleet buyers balked, orders vanished. The ripple spread from truck stops to logistics hubs, threatening America's already fragile supply chains. And overseas, the picture was even worse. GM's South Korean division exports nearly 90% of its cars to the U.S. With tariffs, almost its entire business model was crippled. Industry watchers whispered that GM Korea could face the same fate as GM Australia, which collapsed in 2017. Meanwhile, Hyundai and Kia scrambled to expand their U.S. factories in Alabama and Georgia to dodge tariffs. But new assembly lines don't spring up overnight. Their timeline? 2027 at the earliest. Until then, they're stuck paying the tariff bill. And so are their customers. The chaos reached deep into the supply chain too. A single piston might cross borders 3 times before becoming part of an engine. Now, every crossing risked new fees, delays, or paperwork traps. One Canadian supplier lost $1.2 million in a single week because of a customs misclassification that triggered surprise tariffs. What was supposed to be a precision tool to help American workers had turned the global auto supply chain into a minefield. So here's the reality. A policy designed to save American jobs has instead silenced factories, fractured unions, and thrown entire communities into uncertainty. The question now isn't just whether GM survives, it's whether America's auto industry can withstand the very policies meant to protect it. But what do you think? Were these tariffs a bold gamble worth the pain, or a catastrophic mistake that could cripple the industry for years? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every one. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to understand what's really happening behind the headlines. Because if this is what saving American jobs looks like, the story is far from over.